5.9, we'll talk about impacts of mining. The big thing that you want to know before we start talking about mining is that we are running out of easy places to mine. And as we are running out of the easy places to mine, we're having to go to the places that are harder to mine and don't really have as much of, truly valuable ore. But because of the depletion of those other mines, it's become worth it. However, because this extraction of these ores is much more difficult, it uses a lot more energy, it causes more waste and pollution of air, water, and so on. So we're choosing a mine site. Initially, you want to look at what are the costs of this whole endeavor. Is it really worth it? How many workers am I going to need? What health risk is posed to them? What kind of things could they be exposed to that then you'd have to be responsible for paying for? What are the costs of environmental restoration? Is it going to be mined to a point where to put it back is near impossible? And then on top of that, if that's all the stuff that you're having to pay for, what are you going to get out of it? How much ore is truly there? And in the past, these ores, like I said, that are harder to get to, those are the places where you need more people, there's more health risk, there's more environmental impact. You're not getting a lot of money from that ore, but because those ores have been depleted, it becomes worth it. The surface mining is, like the name suggests, mining at the surface. They have to strip away large areas of soil and rock called overburden in order to get to the ore underneath. A very common one is strip mining, which removes the vegetation from the area and then kind of makes like a little stair step into where the ore is. However, because we're removing the vegetation, that makes the area more susceptible to erosion because you're taking away roots, and if you're taking away roots, you're taking away the things that it's holding onto the soil. So this becomes very vulnerable to wind and to water. And we'll talk about it in a little bit, but when you're exposing these rocks, some of these rocks have things like pyrite in them, which are sulfur, and that's going to become important when we talk about a certain type of water pollution. So this is an example of strip mining. My bad for not getting a picture without a watermark, but it is still a good picture because you can see how it makes little steps into the ore, and then we'll gradually kind of shift those steps out in order to get the ore underneath those steps as well. Right away, a huge issue is the waste that's left over from taking the stuff out, because when you're mining, you're not taking out all the valuable things. It's not as perfect as that. It's inside of other unvaluable things. So first of all, you have to get rid of the tailings, which is all the stuff kind of surrounding the ore, and then it has to be refined even further to get the pure metal. And the waste left over from that is called slag. So I know there's a lot of terms, but I like this picture because it shows really well what all these terms are. So initially you have to get rid of the overburden. So that's your first area of waste. You have to move it someplace else. You have to cut down all these trees in order to get to it, or whatever is on top of that surface. And then you take out this huge chunk of stuff. And then you have to initially separate the valuable stuff from the bad stuff, and that's called tailings. What's left over of the good stuff is the concentrate, and then it gets refined through smelting, and then you have your pure metal that's going to go on and make stuff, and your byproduct. And your byproduct and the waste products from that, that's the slag. On the one hand, mining does provide everything that we need. Everything around you, from your cell phone, your computer, everything. We need mining because we need the materials in order to make our stuff. It's also a way for us to get low-cost energy in the form of coal. So even though the use of coal has gone down significantly and will continue to decrease as we have more energy efficient and cheaper methods of energy production, such as natural gas through fracking. It's going to continue to go down, but still right now it's very cheap. It's very easy to transport compared to things like petroleum and natural gas. So that's why it's still something that's very prevalent. However, mining is very destructive to habitats. You see loss of vegetation, which increases erosion. Something called acid mine drainage, which I was talking a little bit about later. I'm going to talk more about in the next slide. And that contaminates groundwater. Releases dust particles, which is a health impact to the workers. Releases methane, which is a greenhouse gas. There's so many cons, and it's not to say that we have to stop mining, or that we're going to stop mining because we still need the stuff. But this is also why recycling is so important. It's not just a hippie thing, it's the reality that these are non-renewable resources in a lot of cases that we're having to mine. And eventually we're going to run out of it. And that's why recycling is so important, or even, before that, the reduction of the stuff that goes into it, because it allows us to expand and prolong our use of these products. Okay, acid mine drainage is what I was starting to talk about a little bit before. You have rocks that contain sulfur, particularly pyrite, that become exposed when you take off all this overburden. And then when it rains or it's in some way exposed to water, then that pyrite becomes sulfuric acid and iron. And the iron is what gives it the orange, yellow, sometimes like brownish color. And with the sulfuric acid, that's really the issue. Not to say iron's not the issue, but the sulfuric acid is definitely the issue, because if you're a fish, you can't live in acid water, and you can't drink acid water. It's very dangerous and very toxic, and it's very corrosive, to bridges and other infrastructure. Contaminates the drinking water, and that's just, you can't drink sulfuric acid. Just no. And also, you're definitely not going to go swimming in it or canoeing, so the tourism industry suffers as a result of that. So it's a huge problem, especially in abandoned mines if they're not being monitored. If you've left behind all this waste rock, and then just kind of check out, we're on to the next mining site or something. So that's something, it's a huge disadvantage for sure. So going back to what we were talking about before, that is the reserves, particularly of coal, are getting smaller because of the lack of easily accessible reserves. It becomes necessary to go to more extreme areas, like in the form of subsurface mining. So subsurface mining is very dangerous. It's very expensive. It's very destructive. It can lead to instability of the rock around it. So they can cause, mine collapses, a whole lot of stuff. But it's become necessary if you want to get your stuff. This is a picture of subsurface mining. Another issue is transporting, because you have to go a long distance there and back. And a really, really destructive method, very extreme method of mining that's being used is called mountaintop removal, and it's exactly what it sounds like. There was a mountain there, and now it is gone. So what they'll do is they'll blow out giant areas of rock and kind of whittle down this mountain in order to get at usually coal, and that's most time of what they're getting is coal. I don't think I can think of anything off the top of my head that they use mountaintop removal except for coal. I'd be interested to know if they do, but anyways. And it's extremely destructive because you have a mountain that took a lot of years to form, millions of years, and then you just blow it up to get at the coal. Habitat destruction doesn't even begin to cover it. All that rock, by the way, has to go somewhere, so typically they just push it off the side, and then you have all this sediment in your pond or your river, and then that just messes that up, it's just, it's awful. We're actually going to watch a video from National Geographic called From the Ashes when we get to energy. It's going to talk way more about this. Because it's just the worst. Honestly, it's just the worst. Look at this beautiful mountain, full of life, and look at all the photosynthesis happening, taking carbon out of the air, and water being produced. It's great. And then they blow it up to get coal, and that's just it. It's terrible, so terrible. I try not to be too opinionated, but like, it's awful. All right, last thing we're talking about is reclamation, which is what they do after that area's been mined as much as possible. They have to fix it back to what it originally was. So they bought the area from someone, and then they took all the stuff out, and then now they got to fix it. So what they'll do is they'll first recontour the land to the original topography, which is basically like the shape of the land. It's got to look kind of like what it used to before. They'll replace topsoil and replace nutrients, plant some seeds and replant the native vegetation, and then just kind of let it be for a little bit, get some secondary succession going on, monitor it for a while just to make sure everything's on track. I will say with this one, it comes up in FRQ sometimes to describe what happens in reclamation. And I cannot tell you how many students I have seen write, they bring in animals. And I'm just going to point that out very clearly. They don't bring in animals. They don't go and capture 20 deer and be like, here's your new home. It doesn't work like that. Because animals they do what they want. And you're not going to force them to live in this new place just because you planted some trees. But the whole point is like to have the secondary succession of it becomes a place that's inviting enough, and then like the animals will come back in and go from there. They don't just bring them in. Okay. And then this is just showing a picture of the mining process on the top and then the reclamation on the bottom. So you can see that the idea is to kind of reshape it and restore it back to what it used to be. Alright, that's all. As a summary, describe the natural resource extraction through mining and the ecological and economic impacts.